again because he is feverishly working on all of the bills that we intend to introduce before Monday. So he is busy in drafting. However, as always, he is very generous with his time to answer our questions after the meeting if we have them. Mr. Guinan and I take very detailed notes on all the questions that go back to a committee council for clarification. And with that, I think we are ready to move to our first and only bill hearing for today. For those of you who are joining us online or from afar, the process has not changed to participate. If you are looking at our meeting on Nellis, there should be a button there to participate. Click on that button. That will allow you to register with your name and your position and your affiliation, and that will provide you with a phone number to call in to voice your support, opposition, or neutrality on the bill. Every speaker will be given 2 minutes to speak. And with that, I will turn it over to our special guest, who we are very, very happy to have with us today, Senator Neal, one of our colleagues who does not sit on this committee. And so it's extra special to have you today. And please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Thank you for, number one, hearing this bill. And this bill is not without its own level of controversy. So I appreciate at least having the platform to discuss the policy. I want to set the stage for SB140. I decided to bring this bill to highlight and hopefully educate on what I feel is a moral issue and an issue in need of reform. Last session on the Assembly side, I chaired the subcommittee in ways on public safety. And it was the first time I had heard about the wages and the prison industry setup. And I became deeply concerned because it was my understanding that the work opportunities that were happening within NDOC, within the 2 years of pending release, that there was at least some form of, I guess, independence with those wages. But what I knew to be the truth was that formerly incarcerated persons, when they were released, find themselves released in poverty with no job and potentially no housing. And so when I learned that on average, the state is spending federal monies that they're receiving, roughly about $2.8 million that is actually occurring in Clark County to help workers find work, yet there is a prison industry system of private corporations that are paying wages to these prisoners. And I found it to be, number one, counterintuitive that we would have private corporations paying wages to prisoners at 35 cents an hour, and then place these ex-offenders on the street, poverty, and then have additional government money to then help find them a job. So I looked deeper into the issue and I found out that the issue, the prison work complex or the prison industry complex has significant similarities to what is considered convict leasing. Convict leasing is a old process. It has its roots in slavery. It's the political backdrop of the passage of the 13th Amendment and the Reconstruction era, where the South found another way to capture its lost labor force through incarceration. And it's funny because in 1871, the Virginia Supreme Court ruled that a convicted person was a slave of the state. The 13th Amendment has often been viewed as ending slavery, but there was an exception in the 13th Amendment that said that slavery could occur if you were in prison. And that is how I view what is currently happening today. That is why I call it convict leasing. And I think it's very important for us to understand and to define in this day and era what is slavery, and to understand that slavery was an economic endeavor to use human beings as property to obtain profit. And that is what this is, and that is what it was in 1870, and clearly 1970 and 2021. The issue that I'm trying to unveil is that convict leasing became a national and systemic adoption, and southern states started it, but it spread across every state. And the current practice that's in place is, I believe, it's compelling, and I believe it is a moral issue that we must address on whether or not a human being, because they became incarcerated, is therefore property and therefore allowed to be leased by the prison and then paid a range of 35 cents to $1.50, as you will see. I posted a chart of all of the wages for the industry in the exhibits. And I found it interesting because the wage setup that's currently going on in the prison system is very similar to a adopted policy called peonage, which was debt slavery or debt servitude, where the system was the employer would compel the worker to pay off debt with work. Now, how I see the similarity is because, yes, they are in prison because they committed a crime, but the deductions that are happening in the prison for wages range across all spectrums. We are deducting for capital improvement. We are deducting for operations, restoration. We are deducting it's called a new construction fund. And there are a series of things that are being taken away from this dollar or this 50 cents or this 35 cents, depending on where you land. And so I wanted to bring this bill because I wanted to discuss it because I want to challenge the system. Do I believe this bill is going to unravel a 300-old system? Probably not. But did I want to highlight and discuss what I feel is a long-standing issue that we have adopted convict leasing, and we need to deal with the issue of how we're treating them, because on the back end, we're paying for them with dollars to find work where the private industry is paying them wages while they're in prison. It's counterintuitive for me. So I want to share a video for just really quick to help the committee kind of understand what is convict leasing and why I see the similarity and why I brought SB140. So I want to quickly share the screen. It's a quick video. It's by PBS. This is a long-standing issue. It has been around for a really long time. So BPS, can I share the screen?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Convict leasing in the South in this period becomes a new way of racial control among white Southerners attempting to limit African-American economic independence and freedom in general. And what that means is that state officials would sell the labor of an African-American prisoner to a private contractor. The terms of that agreement usually involved a period of time, say 10 days for a very minor sentence, to up to a year. And in exchange for getting the labor of the prisoner and taking full custody of the prisoner by the private contractor, the state would receive revenue. What that meant in terms of what convict leasing involved was that African Americans would work in any industry, whether working for a private farmer, whether it was in a brick-making factory, a coal mine, any number of business concerns, and the business owner would have absolute dominion over the Black person for the period of time of the lease. But once you were in the system, you could spend the rest of your life there. And that was a direct consequence of the reality of being a convict lease and having to fight literally to survive day by day in incredibly brutal conditions.
So I wanted to share that because when he makes it really plain that revenue is received for the behavior of using the prisoner as a labor force for a private corporation. That is currently happening. That cannot really be minimized. And I feel very strongly about trying to lift that issue up to at least address that a current status of convict leasing is live and well in 2021. And so with that, I will go to the bill so you can understand, what is this bill doing? What is she trying to get at? Because ultimately there is a public policy purpose behind SB140. So if you go through the bill, Section 1 basically creates an offender release fund. And the reason why I wanted to create the offender release fund is because I want to make sure that the wages that are being paid, there are minus restitution for families, minus restitution that is paid for the crime victim fund, that is not a part of this, that the ex-offender who is released, who has been working in those last 2 years or 18 months pending release, actually has money set aside in a savings account that they can use to then live and be independent. Not to leave and be on welfare and then continue the government paying for them. Not to leave and then go to the workforce agency where there are millions of dollars being expended to help them find a job, when the goal of the reentry system within NDOC should actually be job placement. Not use my body for 2 years, pay me little to nothing, deduct so much that I barely have anything left, and then put me out on the street and I'm free, and then tell me that I shall basically go out, get welfare, and let the government continue to take care of me. So that's the purpose of the fund. And the rest of the bill, because you can skip, in Section 2, it just makes conforming changes. In Section 3 through 5, the bill makes conforming changes related to the prisoner's personal property fund as a result of the creation of the offenders fund. Basically, I am creating a new fund and then deleting the other. In Section 6 of the bill requires that the offender be paid a living wage and defines living wage as an hourly wage that is equivalent to the state minimum wage. And here is why, and I know, when people hear this, I'm sure they balk at Section 6, because they're like, hey, they're in prison. They lost all rights to independence and therefore shouldn't get paid anything. I want to, if you guys can, and I wasn't going to share this, but if you go to the exhibit where the several state industries, furniture and upholstery shops, there is something in the chart that says it has a SEOC code, and then it has a pay range. And then at the end, it has a cert pay category. And when I started digging into what is the cert pay where you can pay me 50 cents an hour, and then what is the cert pay for $11.47 or $8.54? What is that? And what I found out was we currently have a statute in place that says that you can pay a tenth of what's roughly 10% of the prevailing wage if you are a part of, it's called the PIECP program. And when I found out that, okay, I was like, so you're actually eligible to make more money. You're just not paid that money. And I tried to figure out, how is it that a person gets into the prison industry enhancement certification program? How do you find your way in there? I started digging around, asking questions, and they're like, it literally, there is no set criteria on how you get in, but it is a program where you are at least allowed to make a higher wage, but within the law, there's actually federal law governs this provision of the prison industry enhancement certification program, where they can deduct 80% of those wages. So you make $11.47. They have you working as an inmate administrative clerk. It's paid monthly, but they can deduct up to 80%. And I said, okay, all right. So if I want to end poverty, if I want to end convict leasing, I want to end folks getting on the street and getting on welfare, then I really need to have a discussion around what is the wage that they should be paid. And that is the provision of the bill that I think is the most controversial, because folks see prisoners as, yes, they've lost their rights, but are they human capital? Are they human cargo? Are their bodies leasable? And that is the moral question, because at the end of the day, every time I hear NDOC speak, they say our goal is to do reentry work and help the offenders make their way back into society. So that is the impetus on that bill. And I want to add one more piece to Section 6. And this is something that's super interesting. I went digging through the Bureau, I think it's the Bureau of Justice Statistics, because I was trying to find out how many wages have we paid? How much have we paid? The total amount from under the Prison Industry Enhancement Certification Program. And I found out the Nevada Department of Corrections, this is 41 years, from 1979 to 2019, Nevada Department of Corrections has paid $30 million in wages. That's over 41 years. $1 million went to the victims program. $8 million was paid for room and board, a deduction from the prisoners. $472,000 went to family support. There were total taxes paid of $2 million, but yet the IRS does not consider inmate labor taxable, nor are they considered employees under the IRS, but yet they fill out an I-9 in prison. The total deductions from prison wages were roughly $12 million over the 41, and the net savings was $96,000. When I saw that historical report of the cumulative wages that were paid, I said, my God, really? We're paying for them on both ends. We're paying inside, and then we're paying for them on the street. And I was aghast that this was even going on. But I digress. Section 7 of the bill eliminates all existing categories of deduction except those obligations relating to the support of family and restitution of victims. It establishes a deduction for an amount to be placed in an individual account for the offender and for the contents to be dispersed upon the offender's release. And then Section 8 of this bill requires the director, to the extent practicable, to place an offender in certain programs that aim to facilitate the employment of the offender upon his or her release from prison in a position that utilizes the skills similar to those used by the offender in the program for the employment of the offenders. And that is the summary of the bill. And I will open myself up for questions.
Thank you so much, Senator Neal. I am sure that members of our committee have questions, and I will take them in the order that they raise their hands, starting with, I think it was Senator Settlemyer.
Thank you, Chair Sherman. I appreciate it. In that respect, this bill, I think, is actually a very good bill. I knew an individual that got put out of business because he used to try to make curtains and try to compete against prison industry, and he could nowhere think about competing with the hourly wage that was being paid. I had no idea that it was 35 cents to $1.50, so that's pretty shocking. To me, they should get minimum wage, but also have no problem with that money. It kind of goes with the other bill we heard earlier about making sure with Marcy's Law that, you know, victims are paid back. So I was kind of curious. The first question I had is, how do you think that could work with that other aspect, making sure, you know, yeah, give them minimum wage, but then obviously then that will help the victims get paid back quicker. So that was the first question I had, and I don't know if you wanted me to go through all of them, Madam Chair, or just one at a time.
Why don't we go one at a time? So go ahead and.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Settlemyre. I think it will help the victims. That was one of the exceptions that I had in the bill. And I want to be crystal clear. I am not trying to remove any responsibility for an ex-offender to a family in which they harmed. But I think two goals can be served: restitution and independence upon release. And that's the purpose of me trying to get a higher wage to be paid so that they are not a burden on society when they leave. Why should they be on welfare when they leave and a prison and a private corporation is paying them while they're there? And they don't leave in the position that they worked in. They don't leave as a carpenter. They don't leave as a maintenance person. They don't leave as an upholsterer. That is just the work that they do inside. They don't pick up that job on the outside. And I don't understand why they don't.
Appreciate that. The next question I had is, they choose to work, correct? So we're not forcing people to work currently. It's if someone decides to work, then they'd be able to be paid a higher wage, or as the bill would discuss, minimum wage. But as of right now, people are not being forced to work in prison, correct?
Choice is a choice. They're not being forced. There's a select number of people that are offered the option.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you could put your name on the record for our secretaries.
Senator Dina Neal, for the record. No, they're not being forced to work. But I think my connection to calling it convict leasing is because they're in prison and a private corporation is getting the option to enter into a contract with NDOC to then use that labor. It's never really been a prisoner's choice to say, oh, I'm okay with working for All Wire Industries. That is an NDOC discussion. And that is the form of, the question is, why do private companies get to use prison labor? Why can't they just use regular individuals?
Thank you, Senator Settlemyre. Again, I guess the last part of the question I'd ask, and because I have some disagreements with you on Section 7, I think that, having them fund DNA testing and certain things like that isn't problematic. But one of the things I wanted to ask you a question on, do you have familiarity with the prison work crews, whether it be on fire or for other purposes? Are they also only getting paid $1.50 an hour? Because I've seen organizations utilize those crews, and they pay about $500, an hour for like 10 guys. And we always thought that, well, that's actually a fair, reasonable rate. But if you're telling me that they're actually only giving the prisoner $1.50, where's all that other money going?
So that's a really good question. Senator Dina Neal, for the record. I did talk to, actually the first agency that reached out to me was the Division of Forestry. I believe they pay $1 an hour. And when I checked it with fiscal, it was $1 an hour. Actually, Division of Forestry wants to, from the conversation, and I don't know if they're going to be in neutral or come up on this bill, but they want to pay a little bit more. They actually want them to work as firefighters. Currently, they don't have that capacity. And so they were the first people who called me about this bill and were just like, where are you going with this? Because I was concerned last session when I found out how little they were paid.
Appreciate that. Senator Settlemyre, thank you for the answers, and thank you for allowing me to ask questions. Chair, I appreciate the bill, not all the sections, but I actually agree with the concept of paying prisoners minimum wage. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go next to Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Chair Scheibel. Actually, I agree too. I must say it's an absolute pleasure to hear Senator Neal. Your presentation was, I thought, exceptionally well done. Serving with you on government affairs has been a pleasure. You really do your homework, and your analysis of all these issues are frankly refreshing. I agree completely with virtually everything in the bill. I will say I have some questions about the actual implementation. I actually have used, I guess you would call it prison labor. They used to have a restitution center, and I used to use a lot of guys, and they were trying to get them back into the private sector, private world, and I would hire them as plumbers. But I always paid them, a full wage. They were never paid less than any of my other men. So I don't know if back then how they did it, if they put that into a separate account or not. There have been some issues though. At one time they used prison labor quite extensively for highway work and things like that. And actually it was the trade unions that came and said, no way, we're not going to compete with prison labor, because they were allowed to bid jobs and they were actually doing government work that otherwise would have gone to union craftsmen. So I don't know where that would fit in. And the other thing is, I assume that these private industries that are using this labor are for-profit styles of businesses. I want to make sure that that's correct, because if these guys are actually doing it just to kind of help the prisoners learn, get back into some sort of a skill set, but they aren't producing a profit, that would change the dynamic somewhat. And last but not least, we're picking on the old Confederate states. But here in Nevada, our Constitution says that there shall be in this state neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, otherwise than in the punishment for crimes. So we can blame Alabama or whatever, but right here in Nevada, got the same thing. And the Marcy's Law angle too. If you could cover that, I'd appreciate it as well. So thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry to pack them all into one, but kind of want to get that on the record.
Thank you, Senator Dina Neal, for the record. Thank you, Senator Hansen. I want to be clear. I'm not looking, I appreciate if you guys understand where I'm coming from, but I understand this is shocking policy or aggressive, or that there will be disagreement with it, and I'm okay with that. First question. You started off talking about how you paid a wage. I think what's super important to understand are the deductions that occur. And I probably should put that PowerPoint slide up, but let me just read off what are deducted. And that's why I'm trying to get at this issue. So under NRS 209-4841, and these are deductions for an offender who has been paroled. So mind you, they're going to be free. They deduct housing, transportation, meals, medical, and dental services. This is from the offender who has been paroled. Now add on to deductions for any other offender in NRS 209-4841. So you could have paid a great wage, and then they went back and then these items were deducted. So CIP, the Prison Industry Capital Improvement Fund, room and board, Victims of Crime Fund, funds for new construction. And what's in funds for new construction is a prison wage deduction is deducted for the construction of new facilities, to relocate, expand, improve, upgrade, or improve operations, or provide additional training or employment. A prison wage deduction also occurs to fund prison industries if there's a shortfall in the fund for prison industries. There is also a prison wage deduction to advertise, promote the goods and services by prison industry. And I bring that up because you could have paid and then there was deducted and then they found themselves with less than enough. And mind you, it's monthly. So I'll go to your next question on the union piece. So currently in statute, the prison industry, it's I believe it's called like an economic impact study. So if you go look at prison industry minutes, anytime an employer comes on board, they have to do a prison impact study with GoEd. They have to make sure that the job is not being taken or they're active employers in the space outside of prison. They have to make sure that there isn't an impact on union labor as well. It's been a long-standing rule to do analysis to make sure that the labor that you are trying to use in the prison does not affect the job opportunity of a free person outside of the prison. And that is part of the GoEd impact study. They'll review the company, they'll find out how many companies are doing this work, and then there will be an approval through the Prison Industry Committee. What was your question after that?
I don't, oh, Marcy's Law, because, you know, Marcy's Law, it does say, it says to have all monetary payments, money, and property collected from any person who has been ordered to make restitution to be first applied to pay the amounts ordered as restitution to the victim. So I just, how does your idea fit into the constitutional Marcy's Law?
So, I don't touch restitution. Restitution is excluded and would be a continuing deduction.
Okay, well, Madam Chair, thank you very much. I think the bill, honestly, is a great bill. I think there's some bugs to work out in it. I especially like the idea. By the way, Chair, I hope shortly we'll be having a bill. We're working on it now on prison identification because we have the same kind of an issue. My goal, and I think Senator Neal's and anybody with any common sense, is we don't want people returning to the prison system once they've paid their debt to society. And it seems to me this is another example. Senator Neal's bill is another example of a very common sense solution to help prevent that recycling problem. So I think the idea is wonderful. Thank you, Senator Neal, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Senator Hansen, and I agree. I think this is a great idea, Senator Neal. And we have a couple more questions. We'll go next to Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to pile on, I guess. I do think this is a good bill. It reminds me a lot of the second step. I had a conversation with Assemblyman Tyrone Thompson back in 2017 when we were hearing a bill on education efforts for prisoners as they were about to be released, and how we needed to go well beyond that. Not just, in fact, we thought education should be provided throughout a prisoner's tenure, because education is going to be part of the answer to them succeeding as they get out. The other piece was, how do we deal with the restitution piece, and I thought your point on the prison industry skills, I forget what the program's called, but there didn't seem to be a connection between the skills that they gained while incarcerated and the efforts to get them employed as they got out. And so in that discussion, one of the things we talked about, particularly as this question evolved and then Marcy's Law came up, it's been, well, how do we possibly recompense? How do we possibly pay that restitution? And then that led into the discussion about post-release probation and parole, and the technical violations, as because if they can't get out, they don't have ID, they don't have a job skill or